So the next speaker in the session is Paul Ryan. Paul is an IT engineer who began a really fascinating journey in PPI from a premature birth in the family to now being involved in a whole range of incredible research projects, and also being a board member of the Irish Neonatal Health Alliance. So thank you very much, Paul.
Hi, everybody. Thanks very much, first of all, for inviting me to speak here today. It's a nice compliment and an honour to be invited to take part. My name is Paul Ryan. I'm a board member of the INHA, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about how I became involved in PPI. So, when we were in school, they told us if you're ever talking to people, tell them what you're going to tell them. And then tell them, and then afterwards tell them what you told them. So I'm only going to do the first two steps. But so I'll just introduce myself and then tell you about the INHA, the group who I'm involved with. And then I'll tell you about my premature daughter, Sophia. And really the idea behind that is that you get an understanding of where I came from to arrive at getting involved in PPI. And then I'll talk a little bit about what PPI means for me and for our family, and what we've been involved with and what we've been doing. So the INHA is the Irish Neonatal Health Alliance. It doesn't exactly roll off the tongue, but basically we are a volunteer-operated charity. Nobody gets paid, and we look after the interests of families who have premature or sick babies. Part of some of the aspects of the things that we do is to promote awareness of premature and sick babies and the impacts on their families. There's a day every year, World Prematurity Day, where we try to get local authorities to light up buildings in purple, which is the colour of my text, and the theme colour for premature babies. And obviously social media publication and mainstream media. We try to promote on that day to get articles in newspapers and items on the news and such like. We provide training for healthcare professionals and for families. We got a grant last year which we used to provide workshops on sensory processing disorder, which is a problem that a lot of babies who are born prematurely have throughout their lives, that they have difficulty they can feel and sense things fine, but they have difficulty processing those senses, and it ends up being issues like my daughter has one actually that she likes, that little seam in a pair of socks. She can't stand the seam, or tights, socks and tights, that she won't wear them if they've got that little seam down there. So sometimes you can turn them around and get the seam on the top, and she'll put them on then. But so to you and me, it's nothing, but it's a real issue for those people. So we provided those training courses both for healthcare professionals and for families to go along and try to understand what's going on and how they can deal with it and make life a bit better for their patients and for their kids. And then we're doing one this year on feeding disorders. A similar problem. It's another sensation-based thing, mostly that they don't like crispy stuff or strong tasting stuff or brown stuff or spiky stuff or soft stuff or whatever it might be. And you end up with a kid who'll only eat yogurt. And yeah, that's not great. So another thing that we do is we provide support direct to the families. The Angel Gowns project is one where people donate their wedding dresses and communion dresses, and we've a team of seamstresses who turn them into funeral gowns for babies who don't make it through the NICU or are stillborn. We produce a range of publications that we both place them in the neonatal ICUs and hospitals and provide them for download from our website as sort of little guideline booklets for families and people to get information which isn't always readily available from other sources. And a lot of us to try and cut through some of the medical jargon and stuff too, that it's written in a language for patients to understand. We provide some resources for NICU, so that everybody's always tight on funding. So if sometimes we can get donations that we'll use to purchase items for the ICUs to use. Things like we produced a bunch of little milestone cards that parents can use. So like little certificates of achievement. My baby had his first feed today, or my baby got big enough to wear newborn clothes, or my baby moved out of an incubator, or whatever it might be. And also we provide some little nests for them to use inside the incubators. The premature babies like to have a boundary because they should be in a womb and hit something when they reach out, so they provide little nests for them to sit in their incubators. And a lot of people contact us directly looking for advice. You know, that we've heard that you guys are involved. I've got a premature baby and I'm worried about this or that, or you know, I didn't want to ask the guys in the hospital about this, and can you tell me where I can get help with X, Y, and Z? And then we also have an involvement with international groups. We have one of our members sits on the board, both of the Parent Advisory Group for the EFCNI and on the NIDCAP board. So EFCNI is the European, I wrote them down here, the European Federation for the Care of Newborn Infants. And NIDCAP, they're really PPI people for care rather than for research, I guess, but they run a program where they have a sort of certification process for neonatal ICUs. If the ICUs adapt and provide a family-focused care model or an individual baby-focused care model involving the parents and stuff. So, you know, that if a baby's lying in an incubator sleeping, they could be just as happy lying on their mother's chest sleeping, and it's much better for the babies and much better for the families if parents are involved in that way. And, you know, parent can change a nappy just as well as a nurse, and it's much cheaper to get the parent to do it than a nurse to do it. So, so that's what NIDCAP guys are all about, and really it's just PPI for care. So that's what we do. Now, there are some graphic photographs in my presentation, so I just want to warn people, if there's nothing disgusting, but there's photos of a newborn premature baby, so I don't know if anybody's squeamish and you want to duck out for 5 minutes and come back, I won't be offended. It's something that's quite difficult for me to talk about too, so I'll try and keep it together, but you'll have to bear with me. So, this is my second daughter, Sophia. Back in September 2012, I was on a work trip to Dusseldorf in Germany, and the plane landed, and I turned on my phone, and I got the message 171, you have 2 new voice messages, and I checked my messages, and it was my wife, who was 22 weeks pregnant. And she said that her waters had broken, and she was in the car with my sister-in-law tearing down to Wexford Hospital. We live in Wicklow, but we had our first daughter in Wexford Hospital because it was easier to go. It takes about the same amount of time to go to Wexford as it does to Dublin. But with the Dublin trips, you've got traffic, and my wife was new to driving, and she didn't like that. And also it meant, you know, you've got if there's an accident on the M50 or something, you could be stuck for hours trying to get in when you're. So anyway, we went with Wexford for the first daughter, and it was fantastic. So we said we'd do the same the second time around. So anyway, so she was on the way down to Wexford, and I stupidly got off the plane. I should have stayed on it because obviously that was the quickest way back to Dublin. But I got off and went into the terminal and tried to figure out a way to get home. And I had to fly back through London. So it was I must have arrived there about 9 in the morning, but it was about 6 that evening before I got to the hospital in Wexford. And we didn't know, you know, does this mean we're going to have a miscarriage? Are we waiting for our baby to be delivered because it was only 22 weeks and there's no way she could survive? But the baby didn't arrive, and they found out that there was still an amount of fluid around her and she was still healthy. So my wife hadn't lost all the amniotic fluid. And we were told that since we lived so far from the hospital, that my wife would have to stay in hospital until the baby arrived. And I guess somewhat naively, probably, we thought, well, maybe that's January. You know, she was due the end of January, and this was September. So we were kind of getting set up for her being in hospital for 3 or 4 months. We had to organise childcare for our older daughter because my wife worked at home as a childminder, so obviously she was taking care of our first daughter, who was only just about 1 year old at the time. So we organised a creche for her and sort of got ourselves set up to change to me being at home on my own for a few months. And up to this point, we had no understanding of this world, I guess, of a problem pregnancy. So we were learning all the time, and we found out that she's sort of after, if your waters break like that, people expect that you will go into labour within 72 hours. So it was kind of unusual that she didn't, but it also means you're kind of on a track that you will deliver early. It's just a matter of when. So the hospital in Wexford didn't have facilities to care for a baby so small, but they don't count a baby as being viable until they get to 24 weeks of gestation. So my wife had to stay in Wexford until we hit the 24-week mark, and then she was transferred by ambulance straight away up to Hollis Street. So we arrived in Hollis Street, and again we go, okay, well, this is going to be here till January now. And it was really just the start of October. And she liked that less because Wexford was nice and chilled out and relaxed and quiet and calm, and Hollis Street was a bit of a meat factory. But she was there for a couple of weeks, and one evening she rang me and said she'd been having some, well, we've been texting and stuff, she'd been having some pains and things, and she rang me one evening and said that the nurses said that I should go in because she might be going into labour. So I made my way up to Dublin, I dropped my daughter off with my mother, and we spent the whole night in the delivery ward, or in the delivery suite, sorry. She was moved from the ward down with a midwife who was doing everything she could to stop us from having a baby. And there was an incubator on wheels in the corner, a transport incubator. Obviously if the baby arrived, then they would have to wheel her off up to the ICU. And yeah, we sat there all night, and the midwife recorded all the contractions and took observations every 10-15 minutes. And about 5 in the morning, things started slowing down, and the contractions slowed down. And by 7 o'clock, they said, "Okay, that's great. We're out of the woods. You're not going to deliver." So we heaved a big sigh of relief, and she went back to the ward, and I went back home. And because my mother had Grace, our older daughter, that night, I had teed up my brother. I said, in case this happens again, I'll give you a shout, and you'll have to come running. So the next night, at about 1 in the morning, I got a call, but it was from a midwife on my wife's phone saying, "You need to get here now." So, so I called my brother, and he tore up he lives about 10 minutes away, came to look after our first daughter, Grace, and I flew up to Hollis Street, breaking every speed limit on the way, and I arrived, and everything was very calm. I went into the room, and my wife was there with the midwife, and I thought, oh, great, it's all okay, the same thing's happened again. But it turned out she'd actually delivered our daughter, and she'd been taken upstairs to the ICU. So Sophia was born at 25 weeks gestation, 14 and a half weeks early. She weighed 840 grams, which is 1 pound 14 ounces. Her head circumference was 23 centimeters. Now, when I was thinking about doing this talk, I thought, how am I going to show people what's 23 centimeters? So I made a little prop. This is the average newborn baby in Ireland has a head circumference of about 35 centimeters, which is yay big. And a 23 centimeter one is that size. So this is a teeny weeny. Those fingers in the picture are a female doctor, so they're not big man hands. She was teeny. So if I move on here, this was what I was met with when I first saw her at about 7 o'clock that morning in her incubator. She has a ventilator helping her to breathe. Her skin is sort of like cling filmy and almost semi-transparent, so she looks very red, just because you can kind of see through the skin. She's got those all heart monitors and all the rest, and that nappy was tiny. It was the smallest one they had, and they had to cut it to make it small enough to fit on her so she wouldn't disappear into it. And this one, she's being treated with UV lights. She had jaundice, so her eyes are covered up. But you can see, you can't really see much of her with all the lines and drips and monitoring that's going on. This is her first hospital band, which fell off her leg because it was too big. I'm just trying to... Oh, my thing isn't working here. Use the mouse. What do I point it at, you know? Oh, it's gone. Yeah, so this was a picture of her hand against my finger. So that hand fitted in the first little section of my finger. She's still on the... So this is probably day 2 or 3. And you can see how thin she is. Her arms were about the thickness of one of my fingers. Because there's no fat babies at that age, don't have fat. This is some of the gear she was hooked up to. She was on 4 drips at the start. TPN is like a nutrition for babies because she can't eat, obviously. An antibiotic for infection, some morphine for pain, and they use this drug heparin to keep the infusion lines open. And then she had this was our go-to monitor to check was she all right, showing her heart rate and blood pressure and oxygen saturation and stuff like that. And this was the machine doing her ventilation, doing her breathing for her. So all of this is all around an incubator in the ICU. And it was a very traumatic experience for us to be presented with that. We spent 10 weeks in Holles Street. She had 3 blood transfusions. They were gradually building up her feeding, starting with a couple of mils at a time and increasing and increasing and increasing, because obviously her digestive system isn't supposed to deal with food at that stage. And she had these bradycardic episodes where her heart rate would slow right down. And apparently it's a very common thing, and they treat it just with huge doses of caffeine. They give them massive amounts of caffeine to try to keep them alert. Then when she was big enough and strong enough, they moved her back down to Wexford because that's where we'd come from. So we spent another 8 weeks in Wexford Hospital. A lot of the time they were dealing there with kids with respiratory problems, so we were in an isolation room to keep our baby away from that. They were working on oral feeding to try to get her. She had a tube initially, try to get her to feed from a bottle. She had this condition of retinopathy where her blood vessels in the back of her eye weren't developing properly, so she'd go back to Holles Street to have surgery for that, just a laser treatment thing. And she developed this nasty thing of apnea episodes where she would go grey. She'd stop breathing and go grey and become deoxygenated. And a lot of the time in Wexford was trying to figure out what that was, and we didn't succeed. But eventually we got a bed in Crumlin, and quite quickly there they identified that it was the feeding. Some of her milk was going into her lungs, and her reaction to it was to shut down and have these episodes. So they put the feeding tube back in and fixed it straight away. So we went through a bit of training there on how to operate the NG tube and replace it and stuff, and how to perform CPR on a baby if we needed to. And we were sent home. So this is what we're dealing with now. Sophia is 6 and has no problems. She wears glasses, but other than that, she has no lasting issues at all. It's amazing. So that's what we went through. And it was a huge impact on our family. She's kind of oblivious to it, but on us, it was very difficult to deal with not having any control over the situation. So you're meant to be minding this child, and there's nothing you can do, only stand and watch. And hope that the doctors can do the right stuff. And guilt was a big thing. My wife felt guilty because the pregnancy didn't go well, and we felt guilty leaving our daughter Grace behind when we went to see Sophia. We felt guilty leaving Sophia behind when we went to look after Grace. And my wife actually suffered from PTSD and had to have some counselling to help her through that. She couldn't leave Sophia. Once we got her home, she found it very difficult leaving with anybody other than me. But then there was a big financial hit, obviously, because Anne had to stop working, and we had to pay creche to look after Grace. And we did about 20,000 extra miles in that year up and down to hospitals in the car. So it was a huge, huge cost. And there really wasn't much in the way of supports, which is part of the reason why I'm interested in the INHA. We did manage to get a medical card for a year through our TD. Family and friends were very good to us. We had the counselling assistance, which was a huge benefit, really. But it was all stuff you had to go and seek out. There was no information about what you should do or how family support in the hospitals or anything like that. So we're running out of time. I'm onto my PPI part. So coming from that history, I find it hugely rewarding to be able to contribute in some way, because we couldn't for so long. You know, we were just at the mercy of the medical people, and we couldn't really do anything. And it's, you know, it's not directly helping Sophia, but it's helping other families who are going to come into this. And it's a hugely common thing. 4,500 babies every year are born prematurely. That's one every couple of hours, like. So, you know, it's if we can possibly bring any benefit to those people who are going to be landed in the same horrendous situation, then it's well worthwhile, and it's really rewarding to do so. So through the INHA, I've done some work on. There's a current project underway, funded by the HRB, but it's CRDI are running this Neptune project, where there's 5 PhD students researching neonatal encephalopathy, which is a problem in newborn babies where they've had oxygen deprivation, and it's a brain injury. So from INHA, we have patient representatives who are helping supervise the 5 PhD programs that are underway, and it's very interesting for me, but also very rewarding to be able to give back a little bit, and to be able to have some input into what these guys are investigating, and why they're investigating, and how they're investigating. And hopefully when it comes to the end, to be able to have some input into how that information is presented back to members of the public, and can help people who have these problems, and be presented in such a way that the general public can understand the outcome from the research. I wanted to speak just for a minute or so about the difference. It's kind of odd. I'm not the patient, but I'm the patient representative, right? So I'm just speaking for my daughter. She'll tell you that she was fine and doesn't remember anything, and there was never any problem. So I guess it's kind of a nuance that I'm representing patients who don't have a voice, you know, who can't speak for themselves. But it's no less valuable because of it. It kind of, like I find it very rewarding, being able to do that for her, although it's not benefiting her directly, but being able to do that for her and for her cohort of children who are in a similar place. I think that is it. If anybody has any questions.
So thank you so much, Paul, for sharing that incredible story and so much of your experience and your family's experience. I think I'm going to say that you've done enough after all of that, and for the purposes of time, if you don't mind, we're going to move on. So thank you so much. Thank you.